The first time I realized this wasn't about community rules was when two patrol cars rolled up fast lights bouncing off the lake like a strobe. Heather Whitmore, the HOA president, pointed at me like I'd broken into her house and screamed, "He's impersonating a federal investigator. He's harassing residents." And then the officer looked at my ID, blinked once, and said one quiet word that made her face drain of color. "Chief, I wasn't there to start a war. I wasn't even there to buy anything. I was trying to rent a small cabin in a place called Cedar Lake Estates, just for a few months, somewhere quiet, where nobody knew my name and nobody needed anything from me. I'd spent most of my life in law enforcement. Retired now, doing some consulting on the side, civil rights compliance housing issues, boring paperwork stuff. The whole point of the cabin was to get away from paperwork, away from people who think the loudest voice wins. So when I pulled up to the gate and saw a woman in a crisp blazer already standing there, arms crossed, like she'd been waiting for my headlights, I tried to stay polite. "Hi," I said, window down, hands visible out of habit. "I'm Ethan Cole. I'm here to see the cabin on Lakeshore Drive. I've got an appointment." She didn't introduce herself. She didn't smile. She just leaned closer, eyes flicking to my face, then to my car, then back to my face like she was doing a mental inventory. "That property," she said slowly, "is inside a private community." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm at the gate." Her mouth tightened like I'd answered wrong. "And who exactly are you meeting?" I told her the owner's name. She didn't write it down. She didn't check a list. She just gave this little laugh, soft, almost friendly. The kind of laugh that's meant to make you feel small. "I don't think this is going to be a good fit," she said. "We have standards here." I actually paused because it was so blunt I almost admired the audacity. Almost. "A good fit for what I asked. I'm renting a cabin, not applying to date your daughter." Her eyes flashed. "Watch your tone." That's when she finally gave me her name like it was a badge. Heather Whitmore, president of the Homeowners Association, the HOA. And you don't just show up in Cedar Lake Estates. I could have turned around right there. I could have gone back down the road, booked a place somewhere else, and saved myself a week of headaches. But something about the way she said it, like she owned the air, the asphalt, the water, hit a nerve. Not anger yet, more like the cold recognition that I'd seen this type before. I kept my voice even. "I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm here for an appointment." Heather lifted her phone and called someone without looking away from me. "Kyle," she said loud enough for me to hear, "I need you at the gate. There's an individual attempting to enter without proper clearance." Attempting, like I was hacking the Pentagon. A guy in a security vest showed up 2 minutes later, acting like he'd been trained for exactly one scenario: block a car and look important. Heather pointed at me again. "He needs to leave." I looked at Kyle, then back at Heather. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm going to ask you one thing because I don't like games. Is this about rules? Or is this about you deciding who belongs here?" Her smile came back, that paper-thin version. "We protect our community." I nodded slowly. "Okay." Then I asked casually, like it was small talk, "You familiar with fair housing laws?" That did it. The smile didn't just fade, it dropped, like someone turned off a light behind her eyes. "Don't threaten me," she snapped. "I'm not threatening you," I said. "I'm asking if you know what you're doing." She told Kyle to escort me out, and that was that. I turned around, drove away, and told myself I was done with Cedar Lake Estates. Except, that night I got a text from the cabin owner apologizing, saying Heather had concerns, saying he still wanted to rent to me, but the HOA required an application package. An application to rent a cabin for a few months. I should have laughed and deleted the message. Instead, I said, "Send it." Because the moment an HOA starts inventing hoops, I want to see the hoops. I want to know what they look like up close. The packet arrived the next day. It was thick. Not fill out your name and emergency contact thick. It was we're pretending to be a government agency thick. They wanted my work history for 10 years. References. Background disclosures. A community compatibility assessment. A fee. Another fee. A line about approvals taking 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks just to decide if I could sit quietly in a cabin and drink coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with that packet and felt something I didn't expect, this weird, heavy exhaustion. Like I'd retired to avoid nonsense exactly like this, and somehow it found me anyway. I wasn't spiraling into some dramatic, maybe I'm the problem moment. It was simpler than that. It was practical. I stared at the pages and thought, I can walk away. I can choose peace. I can rent somewhere else tonight and never hear the name Heather Whitmore again. And for about 15 minutes, that sounded incredible. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. "Mr. Cole," a woman asked. Older voice, careful. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I live in Cedar Lake Estates. I got your number from the owner." I didn't say much, I just listened. "She does this," Mrs. Carter said. "Heather. She makes people jump through impossible steps, then she claims they failed the process. And it always seems to happen to the same kinds of people." I felt my jaw tighten. "The same kinds." There was a pause. "People she doesn't like," she said quietly. "People she thinks don't match the image." That was the moment the problem changed shape. It wasn't about my cabin anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about a pattern. And patterns are evidence if you're willing to document them. So I did what I always do when someone tries to push me around with paperwork. I got organized. I made a timeline. I saved every email, every fee request, every weird coded phrase about standards and fit and protecting the community. I sent one short email back to Heather and copied the property manager. One sentence. Polite. Surgical. "Please provide the specific HOA rule and legal basis for each additional requirement beyond standard rental screening." Her reply came fast, and it was pure Heather. "You are not entitled to question our processes. Your hostile behavior is being noted." Hostile, because I asked for a rule citation. A few days later, she demanded an in-person meeting at the community center, middle of the afternoon, like a summons. I showed up anyway. Not because I enjoyed it, because I wanted to see her do it in front of witnesses. Heather was already seated behind a long table, papers stacked in front of her like props. Kyle, the security guy, stood by the wall. 2 board members sat off to the side, staring at their hands like they didn't want to be there. Heather looked at me like I'd tracked mud onto her carpet. "Mr. Cole," she said, "this community doesn't respond well to intimidation." I almost laughed. Instead, I kept my voice calm. "I'm not intimidating anyone. I'm requesting transparency." She leaned forward. "We decide who enters this neighborhood." "That's not how housing works," I said. "And you know it." She snapped her fingers and Kyle slid a notice across the table. HOA letterhead. Bold text. Trespass warning, it said. Banned from community property. I looked up. "You're banning me for applying to rent a cabin." Heather smiled like she'd finally landed a punch. "For harassing the HOA. I took a slow breath. "Heather," I said, "do you understand what retaliation is?" Her face changed just for a second. Then she did something I still can't get over. She lifted her phone and took a picture of me right there in the meeting. "This is documentation," she said. "If you continue, we will involve law enforcement." I stared at her and realized she believed her own fantasy. She believed she could weaponize the police like a customer service department. So I stood up, gathered my things, and said, "Please do." I drove home with that trespass notice on my passenger seat and felt that old familiar pressure behind my eyes. Not rage, not panic, just the weight of knowing what was coming next. And sure enough, 2 days later, I got a call. Not from Heather, from the local police department. "Sir," the dispatcher said, "we received a report of an individual impersonating a federal officer inside Cedar Lake Estates." I didn't even ask who filed it. I already knew. I told them where I was, what happened, and that I'd be happy to meet officers in a public area. Calm, cooperative, clean. Then I drove to the community center parking lot because that's where Heather liked her little courtroom scenes. When I pulled in, I saw her immediately standing by the entrance, arms crossed again, smug, like she'd arranged a surprise party for my downfall. A couple residents hovered nearby, curious, pretending not to stare. Then the patrol cars came in hot, tires crunching gravel, lights flashing. Heather practically sprinted toward them. "That's him," she yelled. "He said he works for the government. He's threatening people. He's a danger to our community." 2 officers stepped out, one older, steady Officer Ramirez, one younger, scanning everything, Officer Park. Officer Ramirez held up a hand to slow the noise. "Sir," he said to me, "we need your identification." "Of course," I said, and I kept my movements deliberate, slow, respectful. Heather kept talking over everyone. "He's lying. He's been harassing the HOA. He's been stalking me with emails." Officer Park glanced at her, then back at me. "Do you have any credentials with you?" I reached into my wallet and pulled out my ID, then my old credential case. something I rarely even carried anymore, but I still had it from a recent consulting meeting. Officer Ramirez took one look and his posture shifted. Not dramatic, just professional recognition. He looked up at me and said, "Quiet but clear, Chief Cole." The parking lot got very, very still. Heather's mouth opened like she was about to object, but no sound came out. Her face didn't just change, it collapsed. Like all the certainty drained out of her at once. Officer Ramirez turned slightly, keeping his tone calm. "Ma'am," he said, "filing a false report is serious." "It's not false," Heather snapped, but her voice cracked. He asked you for legal basis," Officer Park said, flipping through his notes. "And you responded by issuing a trespass warning and then calling 911 claiming impersonation." Heather's eyes darted around searching for backup that wasn't coming. The board members weren't there. Kyle wasn't moving. The residents were watching. And then Mrs. Evelyn Carter stepped forward from the crowd, hands trembling, voice steady. "Officer," she said, "she's done this before. Not exactly this, but she targets people. She blocks them. She threatens them." Heather whipped toward her. "Evelyn, stay out of this." Officer Ramirez held up a hand again. "No," he said. "She's allowed to speak." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stood there and let the facts do what facts always do. Quietly, inevitably, they start to crush the fiction. Officer Ramirez asked Heather for proof. Emails, threats, anything. Heather had nothing but her own story, and her story was crumbling in front of witnesses. When Officer Park said the words "false report" out loud, Heather flinched like he'd slapped her. When Officer Ramirez mentioned retaliation, she started shaking her head fast like she could shake the reality off. I looked at her and said evenly, "Every message you sent me is saved. Every demand, every threat, every standard." Heather tried one last move, pointing at the trespass notice like it was a magic spell. "He's banned. He's trespassing." Officer Ramirez glanced at the paper, then back at her. "This is an internal HOA document," he said. "It doesn't override the law." And right there in that parking lot, I watched Heather Whitmore realize she wasn't the authority she'd been pretending to be. No shouting, no movie-style takedown, just the slow public collapse of a person who built power on intimidation until she ran into someone who kept receipts. The officers separated statements, took names, and told Heather they'd be filing their own report based on what happened. She didn't argue anymore. She just stood there, pale, blinking too hard. I left while the lights were still flashing, before anyone could turn it into a spectacle, before I could even hear what excuse she'd try next. Because the ending I wanted wasn't applause. It was accountability. And the lesson is simple. Never fight an HOA with feelings when you can fight them with facts.